obligation for the board to allow each owner to speak on agenda items only, and the law does not allow for discussion of items that are not on the agenda anyway. So it's more so to document what is the law anyway on condo associations. The only exception here, of course, is a 3-minute limit, which is, again, fairly standard in most associations.
Now, is this vote gonna be amending the documents for the condominium association?
No, sir.
Let me ask you a question since you're speaking right now. So this vote is necessary to authorize this action by the board, correct?
This vote is merely to document this as a board policy.
Motion, move forward.
Second motion.
Who seconds?
To adopt, I'll second. Okay.
All in favor? All right. Unanimous. Motion passes as approved. Fourth item, third item up on the agenda is the approval of the contract for the soffit of the exposed drain pipes. And the recommendation is that we move forward with Davis Construction, and therefore afterwards Capital will do the paint work on there as part of their project once he's finished. Any questions?
Questions? No, I'm satisfied.
Motion to move forward with
I have a question.
Davis.
Were competitive bids taken on this?
Yes.
They're here in the package.
The bids were from both Davis and Capital. Davis's proposal was $8,500, and I don't have Capital's in front of me, but Capital's was over double.
18?
18.4.
18.
So Davis is to move forward with the actual work, and Capital, as part of their deal, will do the painting. Motion. Second. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Motion passes. Fourth item up on the agenda is the approval of retaining Jack Erzane for his engineering services on putting together the plan for underneath the jacuzzi area and the porta cache to address the concrete spalling. Once we have that, then that can be put out to bid.
On the jacuzzi.
Well, not the jacuzzi, below the jacuzzi, the area below the jacuzzi underneath the porta cache where there's concrete spalling. It's affecting the jacuzzi, so that's important. So once we have that, then that can go out for necessary bids.
Did you put out for bid for the consulting engineer?
No.
So why do you make a
Because it's
decision
a very
arbitrarily?
minimal amount.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Why do you arbitrarily choose one engineer?
Because Jack did the pool project, that's very close to the pool project, and we're very comfortable with having.
Yeah, he did a
Jack.
great job. I mean, I think that went so smoothly
Yeah,
that everybody here applauds it. It went so smoothly.
thank you. That's who we're comfortable moving forward with.
Well, you're comfortable with it, but the rest of the community here doesn't seem to be very comfortable. He didn't do a very good job there. And as far as I can tell from the penthouse pool, that's been a disaster as well, which is still a lingering sore. So why don't you go out and look somebody else? Why do you handpick somebody to do the job?
Because we're not interested in your unprofessionalism, so right now, we're gonna move forward.
Listen, Mr.
Let
Let me tell you something.
we're
When
not
you call me,
gonna discuss
listen,
this any
listen,
further.
listen. When you insult me and call me unprofessional, you, who have insulted almost every board member, either to their face or on their back, I take umbrage at that. You are neither educated enough nor sophisticated enough to insult me. And if you think that's what you owe the membership here, then maybe you should reconsider your actions. Don't ever insult me or any board member here or any member of this association. If it's a personal problem with you, you can take it somewhere else. But quite frankly, I don't care if you're not interested in my opinions. But the bottom line is that that's a valid question. You keep appointing somebody who's close to you, whom you authorize to empty a pool and invalidate a warranty, which was a disaster because that warranty was for 25 years, and according to the documents, it's invalid now. And now you want to point it to another project here. Is anybody besides you making that decision on
The
the
whole
board?
board is, and Mr. Milian, you're a fountain of misinformation, misleading all the association members here. So we're really not gonna get into it with you.
Mr. Libowitz, I haven't cost the association $250,000 in
Go ahead,
lawsuits.
Go ahead, Roberto.
A unit owner has made a comment and has expressed his opinion as to the engineer that you should hire, and he has expressed, among other things, that it is his opinion you should consider other individuals. This is a business decision up to the board. The board of directors is free to obtain competitive bids, but is not legally obligated to do so. It is up to this board to entertain this motion and to make this motion now, or to entertain other engineers, or get bids if the board so chooses. It's up to the board. Judge Milian's comments are duly noted. The board could vote on this item unless there are any other comments by the unit owners at this time.
Mr. Blanch, thank you for the explanation, and if I haven't exhausted my 3 minutes, fellow board members, I think you really would be well served in considering here somebody else. The project was not a success by any stretch of the imagination, and there's a history here of problems with this consulting engineer. I strongly urge you, on behalf of the members of the board, to consider other engineers to come in. And Mr. Blanch is correct, it's a suggestion, they're not obligated by it, but I think in good conscience, given the track record, you consider having other engineers come in and consider doing the consultation for that work. Now, I don't know if any other board member, any other association members here would like to echo that, but I think that that would be well served in light of the fact that that pool project was not considered by the membership here as a success.
Thank you, Mr. Milian.
You're welcome, Mr. Libowitz.
Motion to move on the issue.
Want me to make the motion? That we hire Jack Erdesign for this spa, whatever needs to be done.
Motion's been
In
made and
accordance
seconded.
with his proposition.
Motion's been made and seconded.
Dated June 23rd.
Any further discussion by the board before a vote is taken? Any additional commentary from the unit owners? The vote is?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry, I didn't get a second.
Yes, Marcos.
Number 5, last but not least, the ratifying the procedure.
Mr. Libowitz, hold on a minute. Is somebody playing a cell phone?
You can't turn it off.
Would you please turn it off?
Number 5, ratify procedure for president and property manager spending limits, $2,000 board approval for association common expenses, as we've had in the past for many years.
Mark, you want to talk?
No, well, I don't think there's any discussion. I'll make a motion
Okay.
that we approve the expenditure limit so stated.
Before you vote on that, I would like to make a point of inquiry.
If you don't mind, Judge.
Yes,
Is there
sir.
a second to the motion first? There's a second to the motion. Okay, now, is there any discussion by the board members first?
No. Yes.
Okay, Your Honor?
Yes, sir. Here's my question. Apparently, this has been done for a number of years without any legal authorization whatsoever. I asked our property manager in an email, and she was kind enough to respond very quickly that there was no authorization whatsoever. This has been going on for a number of years. What is the legal authorization for what's been going on? And she's been kind enough, she told me to make an appointment, and I'm gonna be able to inspect the expenditures. What authorization existed, and was any legal advice sought for doing this without approval of the membership or a vote of the board? Can anybody provide an answer for that?
This took place somewhere between the Shirley Klein, Lou Klein, and Stanford Brown era. I was on a board at that time. I was either a director or a vice president. I do remember it was voted upon. I don't know where the records are from that time. Amy, if you speak with Amy Fleischman, I think she was secretary during that time, and she was mostly secretary during all those administrations. She might have a better insight as to exactly whose administration it was placed under, but it's been carried on since. So,
Can I say something? I just want to say that basically, to my knowledge, the expenditures we're talking about pumpkins, okay, and a Christmas tree, and I believe some fish food. It's really not, you know, and God forbid an emergency.
We have had emergency items on the past on that. This past, examples would be this past spring, we had a major, on a Saturday, a major flood from the drains of the pool deck. We had Surf Pro in here. Our expenses with them was about $2,000 to $3,000. Lobby had to be shut off 3 to 4 hours, all the way to the elevators. We had, you know,
And this
water cooler. So these are the type of things that expenses have been allocated on for quick decisions. We had a sinkhole in the parking lot not too long ago. Manager made the decision on that. That was something that had to be dealt with immediately. So these are the type of things that we, the decisions that the board has to be able to permit the president and the manager to make. We're not running a nursery school here. Most boards have limits that start at $2,000, $5,000, and I've met with presidents recently. Some even have a percentage of their annual budget that they're allocated to. So this is something that is par in this industry.
Before I give up my last three, or the time of my 3 minutes, the manager's response to me was that there was no record of any legal authorization for these expenditures. If they've been going on for more than 5 years, that's a significant amount of money. And obviously that would lead to the impression that that money could subjectively be spent to benefit associates, friends, colleagues. So is your answer that there is no document you can show me which legally authorized the arbitrary expenditure of association funds?
Like I said, that was passed during an era, during Shirley Klein, Lou Klein, Stanford Brown era, someplace about 8, 9 to 10 years ago, or 9 to 11 years ago. All right, I don't have access to those records. Property manager, I don't think has access to those records. I'm going from recollection. I was on boards during that time as either a director or a vice president, but I do remember that it came up for a vote and it was passed unanimously.
Well, I would
Now,
like,
you might have been on a board at that time too, when it was,
see, I always opposed that because I thought that was a good way for graft and corruption, because if somebody can arbitrarily spend money without having the board even retroactively approve that expenditure, that leads to nepotism and favoritism. And all I'm asking as an association member is to have the legal authorization, not retrofitted right now, which appears to be what is going on right now, but I want the legal authorization that authorizes it in any legal opinions that sanction that kind of independent expenditure without authorization of the board. All I'm asking is there such a document, is there such a legal opinion, to your knowledge?
to my knowledge, I can't find it, okay?
Thank you very much for acknowledging me. In reference to the ratification of this point that we're looking to ratify, specifically, can you state where can we find that authorization in the association's document or in Florida Statute 718? Where does it give the board the authority to actually, if I'm understanding this correct, to approve this expenditure that will not be will not be subject to the board's approval, unless I'm understanding it incorrectly?
The board of directors is free to establish predetermined spending authority for any association representative pursuant to board action. That's what's being done at this meeting right now.
And that is in Florida Statute 718 or in the association's document?
It is within the authority of the board pursuant to 718 and 617 Florida statutes.
Okay, great. And as a follow-up to that question, the audits that were done previously, the $2,000 expenditure monthly, is this included in these audits, those previous audits?
Does any board member have specific knowledge or recollection as to whether the audits make any reference to this predetermined spending authority of the board? If you don't have specific recollection, then you need to.
I can't tell you previously, but my understanding is if something is spent, it then goes to the proper account. In
It's
the
coded
budget,
the proper.
it goes to the proper account in the
The
budget.
question that the question that was asked was whether the
Prior.
audits have any reference to
No.
this predetermined spending authority.
No.
You're not aware of that?
Not aware
No.
of.
Okay, I mean, suffice it to say that the audits are available as part of the official records for any owner to review in order to make that verification.
So in other words, then, since the audit doesn't cover these expenses, what checks or balances do we have as unit owners to actually monitor the expenditure of that account? Because the board is actually surrendering its fiduciary responsibility to monitor that. So what checks and balances do we have?
Well, I mean, once again, I don't believe at any point in time did anybody say that the audits don't make reference to this. Those audits speak for themselves, and what is indicated in those audits and what is not indicated in those audits, one can read and draw their own conclusions. As to what checks and balances there are, the only condition that I've heard at this time, and the only condition that there is on the vote, is that it be for proper common expenses and that it not exceed $2,000. So the statutes do delineate what is a common expense, and so if it's not a common expense, for example, if the money was being used to treat friends and family to dinner, that's not a proper common expense of the association. So that would be a check and balance, which I presume would be an actionable cause by the association upon verification.
But Counselor, and thank you very much for actually, you said assume, and assumption is actually something that for checks and balances, we can't go with an assumption. That actually is negligence on our part. You'd know that. And two, there actually needs to be a process that's actually set up. I mean, you as a counselor, you have a very affluent firm. Whenever you expense things, there's a check and balance. Someone that checks to see whether this is for friends or family, or if this is for common elements. What checks and balances do we have?
That's up for the board to discuss, because I have not heard of any check and balance at this time. The only check or the only condition is that it be a common expense and that it be $2,000 or less. The board is free to consider additional checks and balances, but right now, there are none on the table. So if the board wants to address that, they can address it. If the board wants to pass on it, they can pass on it. The question, I believe, has been asked. I leave it up to the board to answer it or to pass on it. And if the gentleman has any other questions, should the board decide just to pass on it, the unit owner may continue as there's still an unexpired. Okay, do you have any additional comments? Because you still have time of your allotted 3 minutes.
Oh, Counselor, you're so generous. Thank you very much for being so polite today. But I will pass. Thank you so much. Wow.
I have a comment. There's this gentleman there. As far as the check and balance, is that any expenditures that are made have to be signed for by 2 board members for what comes out of association funds. So there is a check and balance in
I would actually argue to say that that is not an efficient checks and balance, because that would be covering an expense of $2,000 that's already approved by the board and ratified by the board, that actually whatever it is for common elements, that's not an adequate checks and balance. No, sir, I disagree.
That's a matter of opinion.
The opinions of both owners, once again, have been noted. Unless the gentleman has a question other than a comment, your point is duly noted. Any other questions or comments by the owners?
Yeah, one question. Why, if this was already approved allegedly in the past, why is it being reconsidered again? Or is it because I made an inquiry and I questioned the expenditures that were being made?
That's a question that the board can answer.
I want to make a statement based on that. When it was brought to our attention, right, when the question came up, as you know, there is no standing approval that can be found in order to address this issue. So based on that, for the intent and purposes of transparency, upon discussion within, okay, one at a time or maybe two people at a time, that we felt that it would be better to bring it to the board meeting, to bring this up, to officially approve this type of expenditure for this type of amount, which would now be documented in minutes, be kept. We will have it. Everybody here is aware of it, and we can go on from here. One of the things that I had mentioned was that when these expenditures take place, they are then addressed, and not necessarily addressed. The rest of the board is informed at the next immediate subsequent meeting after those expenses are made. So this way, there is an accountability. There is no payment that can be made, whether it be by credit card or by payment for reimbursement, without it going through management, either through petty cash or through a check system. If it's a check system, two people or two board members do need to sign that check. And the same thing with petty cash, because when the petty cash is replenished, it's done, and tell me if I'm wrong, by check to replenish that money, and that check has to be signed by two board members who also have to look at those petty cash slips.
So your answer is that for the last, as Mr. Leibowitz said, for the last 8 or 9 years, there's been no legal authorization, and there's been no checks and balances, and there's been no auditing of those expenditures. You have those?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, not at all, Jamal. You elucidated me, but it appears apparent to me that this is being done without authorization over the last 8 or 9 years.
Well, I think what was mentioned is that there's no record to support the vote that allegedly was taken a few years ago, but Mr. Leibowitz mentioned earlier that his recollection is that the policy was implemented at some point in the past, but that admittedly there is no, to their knowledge, record to evidence that vote having been taken by a previous board.
You're an expert on the material. What is the obligation of the association to keep records?
The association's obligation is to keep minutes of meetings for the past 7 years.
Can anybody produce any minutes from 7 years ago? Not that you would know the answer. I mean, you may know.
We have minutes.
Okay. Do you know of any records to substantiate these expenditures?
Not, I mean, we looked through the minutes and now we didn't find it.
And I believe for financials, it's a longer period than 7 years also, for financial records, if I'm wrong.
Well, again, that's all in the statute, but we don't need to go over what the statute provides. The statute provides what it provides, but suffice it to say that whatever the statute provides as far as the association's obligation to maintain official records, it is what it is. I mean, I don't think anybody here is gonna dispute what the association's obligation is pursuant to the statute. And to the extent that the association doesn't or hasn't complied with it, then that is a violation of that statute, or that obligation. I mean, I think that's as black or white as something can be. Now, again, I myself have not looked at all of the records that the association has, nor do I know if any board member or even the manager has audited each and every one of the association's official records, so I don't know if anybody here is in a position to confirm whether each and every one of the association's official records have been maintained pursuant to the statute. I'm sure it's everybody's hope that that is and has been the case. Are there any other items before this question is called for a vote? Any other comments?
Motion? Didn't we make the motion? That's what
The
it's.
motion has been made
Do you
and the
wanna
motion has
say
been
something?
seconded.
I want to ask a
I'll
question.
second.
Is that $2,000 limit per item? In other words, if you have an item that comes up for common areas, you can take $2,000. What if there's more than one item? What if there's 5 items and they're each less than 2,000? Could you take out under 2,000 for 5 items?
It could conceivably be done, but this is a policy and a practice to be made so that a board and property manager and a president
I understand.
who you entrust can act on things immediately when need be without having to call every 2 minutes for a board meeting. Every moment when we wake up here in the morning, there is some type of problem that's occurring that has to be addressed, okay? And nobody can be gathered together every 2 seconds to be discussing these things. Decisions have to be made. That's what the practice is for, okay? And it's a common practice throughout all associations. And as I said, most associations have minimum of $5,000 limits, and several have a percentage basis of their actual budget.
And what's the maximum?
There's no maximum. It can be adjusted. It's, you know, best what the board decides, or have to revisit it at other times, you know, to amend it. I mean, there's situations that pop up all the time. One example was a couple years ago, storm came in at night, portion of a tennis court fence blew down, all right? It was a $600 or $700 expenditure. We needed to have a Johnny on the spot to do it that day. We found somebody to do it, okay? We went out, cash disbursements. We went out and bought the poles at what we needed at wherever, at Home Depot, and the person provided the labor and got it done on the spot so we can, you know, move forward.
But I think the question is, what prevents 1 or 2 board members benefiting their friends, families, colleagues on a nepotistic basis? I mean, that's the whole idea of having checks and balances, is not arbitrary expenditures. Yes, ma'am.
Well, if I may just answer that, once again, it must be a proper common expense of the association, so.
Well, I got you on that before. You made that very abundantly clear, and I thank you for the clarity of your answer. The question is, what is to prevent 1 or 2 board members from benefiting their family, friends, or nepotism, or doing something untoward in that regard when it's not under the scrutiny of the board? Now, Mr. Brown did mention having these expenditures reviewed immediately thereafter at the next board meeting, but that's not been done up to now, so we don't know what's been going on for the last 7 years. So the bottom line is, what checks and balances are there? Because I think we all agree that if you give somebody unbridled discretion to spend money as they will, sometimes they're not gonna spend it as they should, or with whom they could.
Going back.
Mr. Milian,
Sir.
there's nothing that prevents anybody on the board, if they want to steal from this association or do underhanded things, not from this association or any other association, okay? The decisions that are being made, okay, are afterwards told to the board, this is what we needed to do, and they've given all the facts of where the money was spent for a specific service or a specific item. So when you're discussing, you know, nepotism and this and that, I mean, elaborate. If we're bringing in, if we're bringing in a relative or a friend to perform a service here, is that what you're alluding to?
Did you just hear your own board member acknowledge that this hasn't been done for 7 years? That there has been no accountability as far as the board considering items that were spent upon? That you don't have any legal authority. You have no legal authority. You have no legal authority you can show me, except your vague recollection, that this has been authorized for 6 or 7 years.
Longer. Okay? You're welcome to schedule an appointment with the property manager and go through whatever boxes there are from 9 years ago, 10 years ago, 11 years ago.
But you can't show me
See what
one
you can dig
document
out.
that says this was authorized. And Mr. Braun's comment today was that he suggests doing an audit after, henceforth, you pass this. So it's not been done up to now.
Mr. President, I really believe your intentions are sincere in terms of actually, yes, coming from me, yes. In terms of having the expenses of $2,000. But you do understand that in any financial transaction, there has to be checks and balances. If you're going to pass on to me $2,000, not to say either myself or anyone may have evil intentions, but there needs to be some checks and balances. I mean, it's not anything derogatory against you personally. I've heard Mark advocated that there was actually something, a policy, but the problem is, based on what we have heard, it's not in writing, and it was never executed. So it has to be, there has to be a checks and balance, and it has to be in writing. It's nothing personal against you. It's to protect you, protect us all.
how
Let
can
me
you
make
go
a statement.
backwards?
Excuse me, let me make a statement.
Yeah.
As it is true that something could be and could have, we don't know. I mean, there's no way to really know. But the fact of the matter is that, let's say something did happen, and let's say there was some kind of fraud in the past, and it may have been for $2,000, maybe even $3,000. But I think we're very comfortable with the fact that it wasn't 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 plus, because don't forget, we do have an audit every year. And our expenditures are looked at through GAAP, and we haven't had a problem in the past. You know, so that gives us some check and balance. It's way after the fact, but it's there. What I am suggesting at this point is, you know, the check and balance that I mentioned before, which would give transparency and hopefully confidence in the board and the individuals that are spending this money. Because there are times when we have to do this. We have to make expenditures that we can't go to the board for. And one of the other things that I had mentioned to the board members when talking with them was that when we approve an expenditure that is a reoccurring expense, that once we do approve that, that expense can then take place because it is reoccurring as many times as needed. So therefore, going forward, and that's all we can do, is go forward, is try to get back the confidence from the membership, if there isn't any, and produce whatever records necessary when requested, and to set the policy so that when these expenditures do occur, that they are brought forth to the board in a report. Doesn't have to be voted on, but through a report. And if we disagree with it, we'll mention it at the time. And
Mr. Brown, let me ask you a question, since you have a lot of historic knowledge institutionally. Has any board member here ever contracted an employee subcontractor or any associate, including family members, to do work for the association under this policy?
Not to my knowledge.
No,
No,
not to my
not to my knowledge.
Mr. Lebowitz,
Not to my knowledge.
have you ever used one of your former employees or subcontractors to do work for the Condominium Association on a discretionary expenditure?
Nope. They've
What
worked
about
on
the-
behalf of the,
What about the work that was done in the manager's office?
approved by the board,
Okay, that was approved by the board?
agreed upon by the board.
That was voted on by the board?
Didn't need a vote, they agreed upon it.
They voted upon the vote? And that was
Agreed
one of
upon.
your, that was one of your employees, wasn't it?
Excuse me?
It was an individual who works for you, isn't it?
Was working on behalf of the association.
But he works for you.
He was,
Does he not?
he's a subcontractor. He doesn't work just for me, he works for many other
See,
contractors.
that's
Mr.
the
Milian.
problem, folks. That's the problem that you get. I mean, if you want to give unbridled discretion to somebody to spend the association money to benefit either an employee, a subcontractor, or somebody who has business connections with them, that's the problem. And you say $2,000 a month, but you just answered the association members, it could be unlimited amounts of money, depending upon the situation.
Not
And
2,000 a
ultimately, let me
month.
finish, and ultimately, if you go over 7 years, we're talking about $174,000, $180,000 that can be spent. That is not an inconsequential amount of money. Now, there should be a prohibition against hiring contractors, employees that have a connection. It works in the federal government, it works in the state government, it works in the county government. If you want to benefit your friends, your affiliates, your confederates and your associates, you should do it on your own money, but not the association's money. And that's one example of something that was not approved by the board, that unilaterally was given pursuant to this policy, which nobody can find a legal document, a piece of paper, a minute to substantiate. That's a recipe for corruption.
We choose the best contractors to perform the best work, Mr. Milian.
You know, Mr. Lebowitz, I've heard that from a lot of people in a lot of countries, in a lot of dictatorships. They always choose what's best for the people, but in American democracy, there's accountability and transparency. The president doesn't award contracts to his best friends.
What? You said, what?
I think,
What?
all right, if we can try to get this back on track.
Well, it is on track. If they're gonna vote on this, they have a fiduciary duty to ensure that our money is being properly spent. And you have answered my question rather clearly, and it's on the record, if it's being recorded, that there's been no authorization for the last 6 or 7 years, and there's one example, at least one, of a situation where money was spent to benefit a subcontractor with a business relationship with a member of the board.
I think all those points are well taken by the unit owners to the board. I suggest the board take those into consideration in voting upon this motion. I believe the individuals that have addressed this item on the agenda have already exhausted their corresponding time limits, if not more. If the board is inclined to vote on this item or to amend the motion, I think the suggestions have been to establish some form of checks and balances, which can be considered either now or at some point in the future, which I do suggest the board take into account. We have already indicated that, or I have already indicated that these expenditures must be proper common expenses. I also am of the opinion that each and every one of these expenses and the directors in making these expenditures is also governed by his or her individual fiduciary responsibility as a fiduciary of the association, so that there cannot be any self-dealing or benefiting to any affiliate of any of the directors. That said, statutorily and pursuant to applicable laws and precedent, just the mere fact that an individual with whom you have a relationship or with whom works with you or for you or whom you work together with is on the beneficial side of an association expense, that fact in and of itself is not indicative of a conflict. There are other elements that need to be met. However, I do feel that it's something that could and should be avoided, or at least there need to be some forms of disclosures when that's going to happen. So I mention it only in passing, given that there have been comments addressing this from the membership. And so I think you should take notice of all these things, take them under advisement, unless you want to change the motion. I think this is up for a vote now, so I leave that up to the board.
Yeah, we're inclined to make the vote. I do want to make a statement, though, for Mr. Milian. For your knowledge, the subcontractor that you're alluding to has done work for Delvista prior to me ever knowing him. In fact, he did your penthouse floors in both towers under a different president many years ago. That individual has been used by the building to do specific work.
I think
Prior to me,
I think Mr. Blanche gave you very direct and very precise legal advice, and I would abide by it. The appearance of impropriety is as serious as the actual impropriety.
Ready to vote?
Yes. I'm in agreement.
All in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Let's get it on.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you.
All in favor? Meeting adjourned at 7:52 p.m. Thank you all for attending.
I know.